Medal of Honor, the highest honor a grateful nation can award its military heroes for acts of courage, self-sacrifice, and dedication above and beyond the call of duty. The history of America's survival is written in the blood of its fighting people whose devotion knew no limits. For the past 50 years, fighting men who wore the silver wings came from all over America when their country called. They learned to fly, they learned to fight, and they never flinched from facing combat. Some lived through 2 world wars. Many paid the full price. This is their story.
Hello. We're at the home of Major General Pierpoint Hamilton in Santa Barbara, California. General Hamilton was awarded the Medal of Honor for a special mission in the North African campaign. What year was that, General?
The North African campaign in 1942. As a matter of fact, just 25 years ago last fall.
Yours was rather a unique mission. How would you define it, General?
Well, it was semi-political, semi-military.
Can you give us the background on it?
Well, it was the 3rd year of the war. The Germans were at Stalingrad. The Russians were clamoring for a second front. Tobruk had fallen. Rommel was poised for a push on Cairo. We had to do something to take the pressure off our allies. We didn't have equipment enough to risk a cross-channel assault, so it was decided to invade French North Africa.
We didn't know how the French were going to react to it. The Nazis were in Paris. The French people were divided and felt humiliated. Unoccupied France was under Laval and Marshal Pétain, who were collaborating with Hitler.
What about General de Gaulle?
De Gaulle was training a Free French force in England, but he wasn't ready yet. It was a gamble. We couldn't expect the French to remain our friends if we bombed their cities in Africa and killed their soldiers. On the other hand, it was very risky to inform the French of our plans. If a single Frenchman in a high position proved to be unsympathetic to our cause, we risked failure of the invasion, tremendous casualties, and, of course, the psychological impact would be catastrophic.
Was General Clark's mission part of the overall plan?
Yes. General Clark arrived shortly before the invasion by submarine at night to meet with some French officers who were known to be on our side.
Didn't he meet with Admiral Darlan?
Not at that time. Darlan arrived later to visit his sick son. Just before dawn on November 8th, it was a Sunday. At the very moment when we were approaching the coast, President Roosevelt made an appeal by shortwave to the French forces asking them to welcome us as friends. General Eisenhower spoke to them from Gibraltar.
At the same time, the Spanish government was informed that the invasion was in no way directed against Spanish Morocco.
Now, let's talk about your mission, General.
Well, my mission was also part of the overall plan. At each point of landing, an emissary was to try to get through the lines with a personal message to the French area commander, assuring him of our friendship and trying to persuade him to cease resistance.
I understand there were quite a few volunteers for this mission.
Oh, yes.
Why were you selected?
Well, I'd lived in France for 10 years and spoke French fluently. We were 3 in that barge. I was a junior officer. I was a major then. The senior officer was Colonel Demas Craw, and Private Corey was the driver. We had a jeep. The plan was to continue by barge up the Sebou River to Port Lyautey, where the French headquarters was. But when we approached the mouth of the river, we came under fire from the French, and there was no chance of getting past the submarine net in the river. So we landed at a nearby resort town of Mehdia Plage, going ashore with the first assault wave.
How did you find your way to French headquarters?
We took the road by the river. We'd know the terrain from studying a scale model.
Was the fire heavy?
Now we were getting it from our side, too. Farther inland, the French were just awakening to the fact that there was an invasion on. Troops were moving toward the coast. It was sort of queer while we were driving in the opposite direction. Colonel Craw sat next to the driver, holding the American flag and a French flag, while I was in the back, holding a white flag. Suddenly, we ran into a battery of French 75s. I got out of the jeep, talked to the French officer in charge, and I told him about our mission. and asked him to take us to his commanding officer. He said he was short on personnel, but he showed us the way. We were quite optimistic now, until about a mile from Port Lyautey, when a French machine gun opened up. Colonel Craw slumped back immediately. Corey and I hit the ground.
Were you scared?
Oh, sure I was. But so was that French lieutenant, because he'd killed a truce emissary. I was so angry I shouted at him, almost obscenely.
In French?
In gutter French. Then they disarmed us and took us in protective custody. A few minutes later, they took us to Colonel Petit, the commanding officer of Port Lyautey.
What happened then?
He put me in touch with General Matinee, who's up at Meknes.
Was he the area commander?
Yes. And for 2 days, I tried to persuade him that the best thing for France was for him to lay down his arms. Well, he didn't want to accept responsibility without consulting with his superiors. And finally, Tuesday evening, he asked me to arrange for his surrender.
Your mission saved a lot of lives.
Well, I've thought about that a good deal over 25 years. And whenever I think of Colonel Craw, I certainly hope so.
Colonel Craw was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously.
Yes. And you know, we buried him at Port Lyautey.
The world was electrified to hear that the Allies had landed in Africa. It was the end of Rommel's dream of conquering the Middle East, and eventually led to the landing in Sicily and the Italian campaign. While at the same time, the Russians started their counteroffensive at Stalingrad and began to roll back the Nazi juggernaut in the East. On January 23rd, 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton was awarded the Medal of Honor for the important part he had played in this chess game of history.
The accompanying citation read in part: Major Pierpoint M. Hamilton, Air Corps, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty.